Matt Johnson, welcome to Cultural Attaché.
Thank you, Craig. It's a pleasure to meet you.
So let me ask you a question. Duke Ellington famously wrote in one of his compositions, "It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing." What does the Disney songbook mean with and without swing?
Well, listen, the Disney Songbook doesn't need my interpretation to, stand alone in the annals of memorable music, but we just happen to interpret it in our own. I mean, it's our chosen vehicle. We take those memorable melodies and just put them in the jazz machine and crank them up, and what comes out is usually very swinging. A lot of the music lends itself to swing. There's lots of lullabies and happy sort of um, children's songs and some marches, and they just, naturally, um, uh, I say some of them naturally lend themselves to swing, and then others we choose to have a little more fun with them, and we'll take, in one instance, the beautiful ballad "A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes" from Cinderella, and we'll do it as a samba and play almost a double time rhythm underneath it. Dong chicka dong chicka dong chicka dong. A dream is a wish your heart makes, and that melody just floats on there. So sometimes the swing just happens, and other times we consciously choose to put it in a style that makes us even more happy.
Now, they had great opportunities for swing. I mean, they did have Louis Prima as a voice in the Jungle Book, and they
Yeah.
even had Peggy Lee write songs and perform them for Lady and the Tramp.
She wrote "He's a Tramp." Yeah.
Right. So, do you think that there was a conscious decision in the history of Disney songs not to go into a swing mode, or do you think that the films didn't necessarily lend themselves to that style?
Well, I know from being a longtime Disney cast member that story is the most important thing. So whoever was in charge whenever production was, in the making, they thought about what would convey what would be the best way to convey the story. So conscious decision, definitely, but just to crowbar in swing music, no, not even. I mean, we'd have to sort of take it production by production, and we'd only be guessing. But I know that, um, something like Mary Poppins had a lot of that early, um, almost vaudeville music. I can't, the name escapes me, but the British version of vaudeville. And then other songs like, well, in Peter Pan, there's following the leader, ba-da, da, 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 which is very much a march and very much, a children's kind of song that tells that particular story of the moment. British music hall was the term I was thinking of, so that made sense in Mary Poppins. And a children's kind of march, follow the leader, also in Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day. There's a little bit of a parade that happens amongst Christopher Robin and all of the characters. So that music was appropriate. So anytime there was jazz, there was definitely a reason for it, like the Aristocats, because all of those ancillary characters were all kind of jazz men, and also more recently the Princess and the Frog. Lots of New Orleans jazz because that's part of the setting.
And someone like Randy Newman, who has jazz in his bloodstream,
Yes.
there wasn't a huge leap for him to go into the jazz milieu for that particular film.
No, in 1995's Toy Story, he does um, "You Got a Friend in Me," which has very much a swingy bounce to it. But then I think it might have been Toy Story 2, where there's a tune called Strange. Well, I wish I knew it, but it's like strange changes. Dun, 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 dun. It's a really heavy rock thing, and it's just so appropriate for that moment. So again, I think it's definitely a conscious decision to play jazz and or any other style. When I'm thinking now, Ratatouille. Ratatouille, all Parisian, not only the instrumentations, but Michael Giacchino's orchestration with lots of accordion and clarinet, very Parisian, almost gypsy jazz, appropriate for the setting and the story it tells.
Right. Since you and your ensemble perform the Disney Songbook, and particularly in these shows that are going to be at the Sierra Madre Playhouse, you know, how do you see the Disney Songbook having evolved over the years, and what do you like most about the way it was, and what do you like most about the way it is today?
Well, not to be redundant, but I think that it is, it's always appropriate for the story. Okay, we already said that. But the thing that it's not only me personally, but I also have had the wonderful experience of seeing it in the audience's faces as we've performed the show a few times now, that you can't separate the music from the time when you experienced it in the movie theater. And for those of us of a certain age, that means, a really grand occasion. Back before you could stream a movie on your watch, it was a really big deal to go to a theater, and we always looked forward to the Disney movies. And of course, we growing up in Southern California, we had the opportunity to go to Disneyland, so we saw all the tie-ins with the attractions and all the visuals, and of course, we saw the characters. But we also had Wonderful World of Color and Wonderful World of Disney. So though there's the music is just one of many, many emotional touch tones that are layered in us. I have a friend whose name is Charles Phoenix, and if you don't know him, folks, Google him. But he is a wonderful humorist, and he calls himself the ambassador of Americana. And recently, at one of his shows, he said growing up in Southern California, the first time he went to Disneyland was with his grandparents. I'm sure his grandparents have been gone a long time, but the memory of being with his grandparents, and then later going with his parents and his siblings, and then as young teens getting a chance to go all by themselves. And I was with him every step of the way of the story, because we were dropped off and just allowed to run free when we were kids. And then, of course, returning with my own children. He says every time he goes to Disneyland, he gets to feel all the ages he ever was. And I just so related to that. And again, part of that is having the opportunity to go to Disneyland, but the Disney music is very much a part of that. Very, very much a part of that.
And if there was any one team of composers or songwriters for whom the Disney catalog is best represented, it's going to be the Sherman Brothers,
The Sherman Brothers.
Richard and Robert M. Sherman. What do you think makes their songs sort of more beloved, or given them the ability to stand the test of time above perhaps any other songwriter songs who have appeared in Disney movies?
Well, first of all, we have to agree to the premise of your question. Are they in fact the greatest? And I think the reason both of us initially say yes, without a doubt, is because of the volume of work that they did. The volume of work that they did when the studio was young, or um, in their heyday. There was a period of time when Disney wasn't making great movies, but everything before 1975 rocked, and or maybe even earlier than that. Aristocats came out in 1970, and everything that preceded it was just fantastic. And during those days, the Sherman Brothers, I hate to sound like a one note song here, but the storytelling, the storytelling and the way that they work together. You know, uh, Walt referred to them as the boys. He'd storyboard with some of his artists, and he said, "Let me get the boys in here, and then we'll figure out where we're going from here." And of course, all of the movie making, especially when it comes to the songs, is collaboration. And I wasn't there, but in my mind and the stories that I know, and even the documentary footage that I've seen, there was such a collaboration, and the brothers collaborated. So to see one at the piano and the other one scratching down something and changing and getting stuck on a word, And seeing that collaboration to me is personally very inspiring. I don't know that there's any other composers that I've even had the opportunity to sort of even witness. And of course, the Sherman Brothers has only been through documentary footage, but the idea of someone coming to you and saying, here's a story, and these are the points we want to hit. What do you think about, music or songs to represent this character? Um, they didn't write Cruella de Vil. That composer was Mel Levin. And the story that I know is that Mel Levin actually submitted two different songs to represent the character of Cruella de Vil, and they were both rejected. And fearing for his gig, in 45 minutes, he came up with a completely original idea, and that became the big hit of 101 Dalmatians Cruella de Vil. So there must have been, a back and forth that happened. And I'm sharing with you my feelings about that process because I've had that experience, and working with Disney, that I've played many shows over the years, and have had the great fun and experience of workshopping a brand new show, a show that's going to open in the park for the first time. And you go to the rehearsal, they put a stack of charts on the table, and they go, here's the music that we have, here's the script. First, let's see if we can play this music, and then we'll have somebody talk the script down and see where things fit. And by the end of a week's workshop, half the songs aren't in there anymore, and they've hastily put another tune in because it needed to supply a story moment. And that, to me, that's the most exciting thing I could be doing in my career at this point. I've had a range of experiences, but workshopping something brand new is as exciting as it gets because of the collaboration.
Well, and I think it's safe to assume that if somebody's going to come in with new music for a show inside the park, it's not going to sound like Arnold Schoenberg.
No, unless they're doing a show on Schoenberg.
Yeah, Disney presents Schoenberg.
Disney rocks Schoenberg.
Yeah, can't wait to see that one. That won't happen in our lifetimes.
I worked for I had the opportunity to play for a couple of performances. We're totally taking a side track here, but my friend Ross Wright has the Orchestra Surreal, and he leads it, and he calls his character Elvis Schoenberg because it's all rock anthems and classical pieces and rock anthems all mashed up. But anyway, there's all kinds of Schoenberg within rock things, but I digress. Forgive me.
Well, I did too by making a Schoenberg joke.
Yeah, thanks.
But if we're going to move more present day, doesn't it feel like Alan Menken is like the heir to what the Sherman Brothers were able to accomplish?
Well, and through the collaboration with his lyricists yes. So all of those contemporary things from Beauty and the Beast forward. And did he also do Little Mermaid?
Yes.
Just because I'm playing the music doesn't mean I'm an expert on it. But yeah, all of those tunes. And again, the most memorable ones we do on our show, Part of Your World. And that is a heartbreaking story about the yearning of a young mermaid / woman who just yearns to be part of a thing. You can interchange that thing, her living on land as opposed to being in the ocean, with any other thing that a teenager yearns to be a part of, and it's really relatable. So yeah, in the Lion King stories as well, it's I'm no different than most. I mean, I'm really affected emotionally about it, and performing this music and having the responsibility of giving a little insight through my narration. I just try and give a little, instead of saying, now we're going to play I Just Can't Wait to Be King, to get a little background on the music and or the production or something that I've read that's interesting that maybe we don't know, that I have to be careful that I don't trigger an emotional little thing in me that becomes distracting, or even worse, makes me emotional, we do, here I'm giving it all away, but we play two tunes from Dumbo, including the song that became the Academy Awards pick for Best Song in a Motion Picture. And when I set it up, I say, um, in one of Dumbo's most tender moments, Mr. Stork, voiced by Sterling Holloway, delivers a precious package to Mrs. Jumbo. And then I go on to introduce Baby Mine. But my mother used to say precious package when talking about um, all of her children and grandchildren. She said, drive carefully, you have a precious package on board. And when I get to that line every time, including just a moment ago, it kind of trips me up, because that music just touches a place.
Well, I think that's what the best music does. I mean, and I'm a product of having grown up in very close proximity to Disneyland and with having many of the same experiences that you have had. But don't you feel like this music allows us to revisit our childhood in some way, shape, or form?
Well, every single time. That's why I referenced um, my friend Charles Phoenix, just because he put it so perfectly. Every time I go there, I feel all the ages I've ever been because he remembers, pardon me, encountering the Disney magic at all these different points in his life, and also remembering the people in your life that are no longer with us. When you think about going there with your grandparents, I mean, that's a powerful memory. Um, and yeah, it, it, to me, it's, it's just part of who I am. I suppose if you grew up and your dad, I was trying to think um, today because again, I see people and they come up to me after the show and they just go, thank you very much. At the end of the show, we do a little tribute to early Disneyland where we show some home movies from the 1960s. And again, if you had experienced that, you can't help but just remember how, um, how much things have changed, you know, as we all, um, always want to think of the good times, to see Disneyland where there's way less people there, and families dressed in the same Hawaiian print, like a family of five, all in the same tropical floral print. You just can't help but chuckle and remember those days. And so, yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, after both of my parents had passed and we were cleaning out the house that I grew up in, I found some old Disney ticket books.
Yeah.
And true to form, they only had A and B tickets in them.
The
And
only thing left.
the ones you didn't want to use. I remember saying, why couldn't the book be filled with just e-tickets? And there are going to
I
be
think
people who watch this and go, what the hell are they talking about?
Yeah, yeah. I think at some point you could, or you could buy extra e-tickets or something. But yeah, they bundle them that way. And the reason we had A and B tickets, I remember the A tickets, that was for the fire truck and the omnibus that went up and down Main Street. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted to go in every single shop all the way up there. And of course, we're talking about Disneyland, but which is not the movies and not the music from the movies, but there was so much crossover. Walt Disney was a genius in having the TV show that promoted the opening of Disneyland, and then having Disneyland host attractions based on the motion pictures and or the story. Just it's all. Um, he was a he was a trendsetter in that regard, and
And
yeah, so
you can't walk through the park without hearing music everywhere.
yeah,
And it all seems appropriate. I mean, a lot of it's piped in now, but you walk Main Street,
yep,
and you know this better than anybody. That's often where you would hear live bands playing.
right. In the Main Street Straw Hatters are still out there, and and from season to season, sometime they bring back a couple of the what we call the breakdown groups, the Firehouse Hook and Ladder Gang, and then there was famously years ago, it's been a while, the Sax Quintet, who dressed in that Keystone. We say Keystone Cops, but the police uniforms from the previous century. But yeah, the pre-recorded music there is all early. sort of parlor music. It's not exactly ragtime yet. It predates ragtime, but it's a lot of xylophone melodies. I forget what they're like. It's early ragtime, but it's it's happy family music from the turn of the century.
Now, I made a joke that people are going to be wondering what the hell we're talking about, but it brings up a point, Matt, which is that a lot of the music that you and I know and that people, probably at least half a generation below us embrace as well, is stuff that kids today don't necessarily have any relationship to unless their parents held on to old DVDs, that and could play them, or they
Right.
would catch, if they have a subscription to Disney Plus and can catch the films. What are you seeing in terms of young people who come to these concerts and their response to these songs that they didn't grow up with the same way you and I did?
Well, there's one thing that happens in general, and I'm reminded of my friend Tony Guerrero, who says, you know, even if you don't think you're familiar with jazz, if you witness a live performance, you can't help but like it. I mean, there's just something about live musical performance that's very powerful. And again, something you and I would take for granted because we sat through innumerable concerts, but young people wouldn't necessarily know a live music production. And so there's that. And then we try to have a couple of the contemporary Disney songs in there. We are doing, you mentioned our performances at Sierra Madre Playhouse. We're going to do 3 performances, a Friday night, which we're just calling date night, but then an early Saturday, 11 o'clock curtain, I think, on Saturday, which is going to be for strictly a kid's show and their parents, obviously. Um, and we've kind of got direction from the Playhouse because they've hosted other kids show, and they say, like our show is 90 minutes straight through, no intermission. And they said, well, we've kind of discovered that, like 55 minutes is really pretty much the attention span of the kids. And we will be tailoring our narration to give them a moment of sort of the Alla Bernstein, the young person's guide to the jazz ensemble. So we'll talk for a moment about our roles, the instrumentalist roles, uh, one, in playing in an ensemble, and then two, how we might take a Disney song that they're familiar with that's maybe has um, a march kind of feel to it, and then show them how we do it, and then show them the original melody that they know, change up the style a little bit, and then have somebody improvise over the top. So we're going to have a brief little section on again, I'm adapting Bernstein's Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, but the Young Person's Guide to the Jazz Band, just to sort of give them a little insight. Want to include them. I always feel that the person who's ever standing in front of the band, even though I'm sitting behind the drums, I kind of cheat downstage. That person on the microphone needs to be a gracious host, needs to welcome people in, needs to make sure that there's a connection being made, and I do my best to sort of set up our performance so people understand what they're in for. And then when our wonderful vocalist Adrienne De Leon is on stage, she kind of takes over that and talks about her inspiration in doing these songs. And I don't want to give too much of our show away, but anyway, there is some gentle guidance that's going on from the front in a way that hopefully makes people feel included and as a result respond positively to the performance.
My indoctrination into the Disney world took place when my aunt took me at 3 years old to go see Mary Poppins. That was
Yeah.
the first time I became aware of movies. It was the first time I became aware of musicals in any way, shape, or form. And obviously the first time that I became aware of Disney in any measurable way. It is my understanding that you have worked with Dame Julie Andrews.
It is.
Your paths have crossed. So you must tell me that she's the one. I've met thousands of people who are famous, and I have never met Julie Andrews, and she remains like the holy grail for me.
Yeah. Well, um, I agree with you there, although I had the opportunity many years ago. I was performing with a group. Boy, talk about people aren't going to be able to relate to us. I was performing with a group called the Palm Springs Yacht Club in the early 90s. And it was a musical comedy group, but we worked for maybe 3 or 4 years as a warm up act for a handful of touring celebrities at the time, including Julie Andrews, but also the Smothers Brothers and comedian Rich Little. And so we traveled one whole summer with Julie Andrews, and I'm going to tell you what kind of person she is because I know that's what you want to know. It was my personal experience that she was wonderful and had a wonderful sense of humor. She was appreciative of the supporting role that we played in her show, but she traveled with an ensemble as well, and then we were a warm up act. So we were traveling separately. Her band was on a bus, a standard tour bus at the time, and then she drove in a limousine when had a driver. And so this was the caravan on these. We were pretty much upstate New York doing theater in the round. We did some small theater in the round in upstate New York, but then we eventually landed at what was called the Garden State Art Center. It has a different name now, but giant amphitheater, maybe 25,000 people outdoors, and yet it had a lid on it. It's crazy. Looked like a spaceship. But so it wasn't uncommon that the band, while on the road, their wives would come out sometimes and join the tour for a concert, and then maybe just for the weekend and fly home. And one of the times I overheard a conversation where she offered one of the guys the limo so he and his wife could travel from one venue to the next together to have some time together because he'd been away on the road. She rode on the bus. So that was my to me that said a lot about who she was, but she was always very, very good humored, and just always made us feel as though our role was valued, and she didn't have to say two words for us. I've worked for lots of people that are like, the road manager's like, don't even talk to them, but she was not that person.
Well, I sort of assumed as much. I'd heard a story about somebody waiting in line, I think at the Golden Globes Awards to use a bathroom.
Yep.
And Julie Andrews came out and she just said, yes, every once in a while, Mary Poppins has to tinkle.
Yeah.
So, so
Yeah.
you knew she doesn't take herself that seriously.
No.
All right, I want to conclude by asking you about something that Richard M. Sherman.
Conclude. Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
How long has it been?
it's we're at
It's
it.
been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. Likewise. In Richard M. Sherman's book, Pursuing Happiness, he tells a story about giving a lecture at USC. And as he described it, some smart aleck shouted out, how much money, did you make from Winnie the Pooh? And he goes on to tell this story about a girl in Texas who had fallen down a well, and they were trying to rescue her. And the girl apparently told her mother that she wanted her to sing Winnie the Pooh because Winnie the Pooh was in great tightness and he got out and I'm going to get out. And Richard Sherman said, that moment made me the richest man in the world. How does music in general and these Disney songs in particular make you the richest man in the world?
Well, I hope I can tell you the story. We just performed our show a couple nights ago, Laguna Beach Live Concert Series. And after the show, a gentleman came up to me and said, my dad has Alzheimer's, out of the blue. I never met this guy before. I said, I'm very sorry, having experienced that. He said, I'm very sorry, not knowing where he's going with this. And he said, it's all good. It's all good. But he's been living with us. And, and I told him, uh, when I was leaving the house, I said, I'm going to see a Disney show tonight. They're playing Disney music. And his father, addled with Alzheimer's, brightened up and said, do you remember when we took you to see the Aristocats? Now, the Aristocats is not one of the most memorable movies, but it's a fabulous movie released in 1970. And it happened to be the very last animated feature that Walt Disney would be able to approve for production in 1965. And he, of course, he passed shortly thereafter. But he said his father brightened up with this deep memory that he had. And he said, remember when we went and saw Aristocats? Just pulled that out of the thin air. Well, he went on to say that his little brother was born and stayed in the NICU for 6 weeks. And when his little brother was able to finally come home, you can't imagine the stress of having a little preemie in a neonatal facility. When my little brother was able to come home to celebrate, my dad took my sister and I out to see the Aristocats. It was in 1970. And this person who was suffering from Alzheimer's was able to tap that because of his connection to the Disney music. So that you can't put a price on that. The fact that I was part of a performance that reminded both those individuals of that story, and that he chose to relate it to me. Just yeah, I'm with Mr. Sherman. Sorry, man.
No, it's all good. I didn't want to step on the moment there. I wanted to let it just exist freely. Well, we'll end on a more humorous note, probably slightly, distasteful to some. But if they didn't, freeze Walt's brain,
Yeah.
for later benefit, hopefully he comes back in time to listen to you guys keep that music alive.
Be my pleasure. I'll tell you, I had something very close to that just happen a couple months ago. Um, I was subbing with my friends on the Main Street Straw Hatters and walked right out in the middle of Main Street, started playing a tune, and up came a gentleman that I recognized. The guys in the band didn't recognize him, but we played a whole set for Dick Van Dyke, and he just was as happy. He just was as happy as if he was hearing that music for the first time. And so, yeah, that being able to play this music, if I can circle back to the moment before, and knowing how it affects people, how deeply connected people are to this music, it's a great responsibility, whether I'm playing at the park or whether I'm playing on the outside with my own band, to present this music at the highest level, because I know how people relate to it. And it's more than just like, oh yeah, I like that music. It's the music that I remember when I was here, or when I was with these people, or or got me started, like you in the movie theater, it just sent me down a path because it was that powerful, is a gift that I cherish, and I don't take it for granted.